For those of you who are logging on, I'm Wes Durham. I'm the board chair of the National Sports Media Association. And we're going to do four of these is the plan in the academic year. There'll be another one in November, and we'll have information. And now that we have your email as a registrant, I should say, we will be sharing that information with you exclusively before we send it out next month. Um, and we'll have the topic and the idea and the guest and things like that. Right here off the top, before I introduce the folks that are going to handle this today, I want to thank Dr. Ken Gaither, Dean of the School of Communications at Elon University, for supporting this project. Ken, thank you again. Really appreciate it. Delighted to have a lot of Elon School of Comm students on here today. I hope you get something from this. Um, and basically, what we've done is we've asked our board members with media experience to kind of create these. And I asked Nicole Auerbach of NBC to take the lead on the first one. And she quickly employed Ryan McGee of ESPN, who is also an NSMA board member. And we are delighted today to welcome Jim Phillips, the commissioner of the Atlantic Coast Conference, here as part of this. So, Dave, if it's okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Nicole and we'll get this underway. Nicole, Ryan, Commissioner, thank you all very much. Great to have you with us today and really looking forward to this.
All right. Hello, everyone. I am Nicole Auerbach. I work for NBC Sports. Very excited to have two of my favorite people in college sports on this panel with me. And I wanted to start by kind of letting them introduce themselves by telling their origin stories of how they ended up in college sports and the roles that they're in, but really kind of just your entry point into sports, journalism, commissioner, like administrative work, whatever that might be. So, Commissioner Phillips, why don't you start and tell us a little bit about how you ended up doing this?
No, thank you. Thanks, Nicole. I also want to thank Tim at Elon and Wes, who I absolutely adore, Dave Gorin and yourself. And I'm glad to be on with Ryan McGee. So he's going to carry this panel today. But listen, I've been really blessed. I just have. I grew up in Chicago, one of 10 children, 6 sisters and 4 boys. And I always had this love affair with sports. Obviously, you feel like your athletic career, you wish could be longer and all the rest of it. But the realities are, what are you going to do with your life? Like, what does this thing look like? And as an undergraduate at Illinois, I decided I was going to work in the athletic department and try to learn the business side of it. And long story short, it ends up 30 years later where 25 years later that I'm the commissioner of the ACC. So I went on a campus, I stayed. I love the business side of it. I love the marriage of academics and athletics, the marketing, the TV piece, all of that. And had stops along the journey. Been in the SEC at the University of Tennessee. I got a PhD there. Been out west in what was formerly the Pac-12 at Arizona State. Was at Notre Dame. Was in the Big Ten at Northwestern. Was in the Mid-American Conference at Northern Illinois, and have been the commissioner for the last 5 years here, almost 5 years. And again, just really blessed. I would have never kind of believed that my life could be the way it is right now. I don't think this was intentional that I wanted to be the commissioner or a commissioner. I think as you learn your trade and your craft and you see where you can influence, that's kind of what led me. The last thing I'll say is the thing I love most about this role is the impact on young people. We have 12,200 student athletes in our 18 schools. And I love that even from a distance, I have a chance to hopefully positively impact our 28 sports. So that's my story, Nicole, and I'm sticking to it.
I always bring that up because I think, and it's great that you mentioned all of that, because I think there's a lot of people who look at people who wear suits and make decisions in college sports, and they don't know where people started or how much lifers in college sports really do care about all the scholarship opportunities and life-changing moments for all of these sports and women's sports and Olympic sports. And everywhere that you have been, you have always been such a champion of that. So I wanted to make sure that we got that. Ryan, you have such a unique story and entry point into your career as well. So tell the audience exactly how you got into this and why you will not criticize officials.
Well, I appreciate you. Yeah, Cole. Yeah, yeah.
Ryan, you glitching? Be frozen? I'm not the one glitching, right? That's him?
Yeah, that was Ryan. He just dumped off,
Okay.
I think.
Okay. All right. We're going to get him back on. Wes is laughing at him. Maybe Wes can be the one to text him, make sure that he realizes that it is not working. I'll give mine. I did not know that I wanted to go into journalism. I thought that I was going to go into business or something entrepreneurial like my dad did growing up in central New Jersey. So very pro sports area part of the country. And I read Sports Illustrated cover to cover every week. I read the local paper. I did everything I possibly could. And I love being around it. I love playing sports, but I was not going to play at the collegiate level. So I ended up going to the University of Michigan, which does not have a journalism school or journalism program. But fortunately, during Welcome Week that first year, I met a friend across the hall who we were talking about our dream jobs. And I said mine would be to, write for Sports Illustrated. And she said she wanted to be a heart surgeon, which she did go to med school and became a doctor. And and her friend was a student, a news editor at the student paper at Michigan. And so she was like, you should join here. Like, we'll get you the email address, the sports editor, and you should go to a meeting. And I always tell people that because I think when you first get to college, you have no idea what you want to do. You're trying to make friends, you're trying to find activities. And that's really how I ended up doing this, was by just doing that and not really, I hadn't really made the connection that like normal people had jobs like this, that your job was to cover sports and to write about it and dissect it. And that there was like a path towards it. So I essentially unofficially double majored at Michigan by working at the Michigan Daily. And then eventually, I worked at a lot of different newspapers for internships. And then I worked at USA Today full time for my first job for 6 years. And then I went to The Athletic when we launched our first national vertical, which was college football. And after 7 years there, I went to NBC full time. So now I do TV, radio, podcasting, and writing. And so it's kind of been a mix of all of the different mediums throughout the course of my career. But yeah, I didn't know that was where I was going to take me. It wasn't like I was, writing down box scores and, making up articles when I was 5 years old. I have friends who did that and who knew that this was something that they wanted to do. But I kind of stumbled into it. And so I think it's always important to, just keep your eyes open and to stay flexible. I also think it's really important to try all different kinds of mediums. One of the formative experiences early in my career was I was at USA Today for about 2 months before we had a massive reorg, and every single person there in the sports department had to reapply for their job, even if they'd been there for 20 years. And so there ended up being a lot of layoffs, and it just taught me to really just never let any form of technology or any platform get past me. It was a lot of people who were maybe less comfortable in the 24/7 nature of news, or just the idea of filing at the buzzer for games and not print deadlines. Twitter, Instagram, those types of things. They just weren't comfortable with that. So that's kind of also guided me in how I've ended up on multiple platforms, I think, is just trying to be as versatile and indispensable as possible. Is Ryan back up here? Do we have him?
Yeah, he's back.
He's back.
All right. Ryan, you want to try telling us your origin story, how you ended up eventually at ESPN?
Yeah, I'm at the home office and I heard a chainsaw start next door. I'm pretty sure they just cut a wire, so I'm on a different system. But yeah, no, I appreciate it. So I've been with ESPN most of my adult life. I mean, my entire adult life, if you include when I was freelancing in the middle there. I grew up in Raleigh, and Commissioner, everybody. I co-host a show that airs on the Southeastern Conference Network. I grew up on Tobacco Road. I mean, the Triangle of Raleigh is where I grew up. And my father, his day job was as a college administrator. He worked at Gardner Webb, at Furman University, at Meredith College in Raleigh. was president of Wingate University. So spent all his time at the FCS Division II level as an administrator. But on the weekends, he was an ACC college football official, which, yes, Nicole, that's why I don't boo officials. Now, I will criticize them. They all have my phone number, unfortunately, so they'll call, or they've known me since I was a kid. But the reality is that's how I learned collegiate athletics, was being on campus and keeping stats for the radio network at Furman, or, wiping down the floor for women's basketball games at Meredith College. Doing radio for Wingate University, Division II school. That's how I grew up. And then I would go with my dad to games. And I remember clear as a bell talking about a huge ACC game in the 1980s. North Carolina was at Virginia. Both teams were ranked. And it was the first time I had sideline credentials. I was 12 years old. And I remember as clear as it happened an hour ago, looking around and thinking, everyone here is getting paid to be here. How do you get one of these gigs? And like the commissioner said, I would love to have played college football. I would love to play it in the NFL. That was not going to happen. If anyone's ever met me, I did not have the size. And so I took my camera to the sideline that Santa Claus had brought me, and I took pictures, and I went up to the press box and I would talk to the writers, and the legendary writers of the ACC in the 80s were so good to me as a kid, and the broadcasters too, that I was drawn to it. And so I went to University of Tennessee. I majored in communications and went to work for ESPN about a year out of college as a production assistant. So cutting highlights, answering the telephone, all those things at ESPN. My favorite part, and this is the most important thing, Nicole was talking about all the different mediums, you have to be able to write. If you can write, you can do any of the rest of it, whether it's produce, whether it's host, whether it's, any feature producer, anything you want to do. And I used to write highlights for SportsCenter. I used to write the teas for SportsCenter right out of college, and that was my favorite part. And so I would call ESPN, the magazine, and say, I'm producing a feature about Dale Earnhardt Jr. for TV. I interviewed him for 30 minutes. I have 3 minutes on TV. Can I write you an article? And that's how it started. So I kind of made this crossover move and have been with ESPN my entire adult life. And every Saturday morning, for some reason, they let Marty Smith and myself co-host the show, and don't tell anybody, but we've been doing it for a while, and they pay us an American dollar. So the goal was get paid to go to sporting events, and knock on wood, I'm doing it. And I think my perspective growing up, because of my dad's job, day job, and his weekend, job, it educates me, and it gives me maybe a little bit of a different angle about how things work. Dad served on the NCAA committees my entire life, and would come home and say, well, this is what we talked about, and this is where I think it's going. And lo and behold, all the stuff he told me in the 2000s, it's all happening now. And so it's an interesting perspective, and I'm very, very thankful that I'm getting to do it.
Since mine was so different, I grew up in pro sports, and my very first game at the University of Michigan as a student, which was my first college football game of anything, was App State beating Michigan.
Wow.
So that was my first experience of what all of this was. But part of the reason that I had wanted to go to Michigan was I went to a high school that was very much the opposite. It didn't have a sense of community. It didn't have people wearing the gear of where they went. Like, they were proud to be wearing it all the time on campus. And so for me, it was the biggest school I applied to and the furthest school I applied to from home. But it taught me all the things that you guys grew up in. And it attached itself to me in a way that was very different than pro sports. And my entire adult life, I have covered college football and college basketball and Olympic sports, which I do want to talk about later in this panel about the future of that and women's sports and all of this. But this panel is about kind of the state of college athletics. And I know that it is a state that is constantly evolving. It is constantly changing day over day. It's changing. But it looks very different, Commissioner Phillips, than when you took this job or when you became the athletic director at Northwestern. Very different world that we are in. So I want to talk about specifically, like, this year, fall 2025, the House settlement has been approved and implemented. Athletes can get paid directly by their schools. What that world is like. So, Commissioner, let's start with you. Just tell us about what your day-to-day looks like, what campuses are like in this world. What are the biggest challenges, the biggest changes, the biggest opportunities of the day-to-day life of a college athlete right now?
Sure. So you're right, Nicole. I mean, the seismic shift and changes is really hard to believe when you think about where maybe college sports was 5 or 6 years ago. But at the end of the day, I call it a modernization of college sports, and the ability for student athletes to be compensated really fits in with what we all believe in America. If you have abilities, if you have talent, if your name carries weight and you can monetize it, you should be able to do that. So the House settlement, which you alluded to, was passed, and it was implemented on July 1st. So that was a major shift for our 18 schools in the ACC, along with all schools across the country. And in the end, there were decisions that needed to be made about rev share, and are they going to be in? Are they going to be out? And what's going to happen with the men's sports? What's going to happen with the women's sports? What's going to happen with the sports that generate 95, 98, 99% of the money, which is football and men's basketball, and the others that generate a percentage or two? So all of that evolvement and modernization takes a lot of work from as it relates to the conference office, compliance and rules and legal consultation, and making sure that we are advising our schools to the very best of our ability so that they can make really good decisions. Some questions don't even have answers to it because you're kind of building the structure as you go forward. We created this this group called the College Sports Commission, which is really the place where these dollars and interaction and this threshold of not going over $25 million, a new CEO, Brian Seeley, who we hired from Major League Baseball, is administering it. So lots happening, along with you still have the transfer portal, and we've had multiple windows at the transfer portal. So you're trying to get some semblance of stability there. And we've gone, I think all of us that are following college sports or in college sports has seen the NCAA just came out a few days ago with the declaration at the end of last week that there's going to be one transfer portal window, right? So you have that piece of it. We have a new governance structure in the NCAA, first time in a long time, where there's a majority voting privileges for the Power Four conferences up to 65% or so. It's too, there's too many other things to even describe, but these massive changes at the end of the day has caused a little shift, maybe a major shift. But the reality is when we go watch our favorite football program or programs on Saturday, nobody's talking about that. Nobody's talking about the transfer portal or the payment of players. It's still their school, and it's still really important. And the visibility has never been greater. And I think people watching things that they love, college sports, and we're talking about football right now, but even all the fall sports, volleyball and soccer and field hockey, it's never been better, I think, to be a student athlete with the support, the access to revenue, all the things that they're experiencing. But I would just say, as a kind of to wrap it up, Nicole, relative to my particular position, no 2 days are ever the same. They're just not. They're just not. It's a career like all of you have or want to have. And I would just put it this way. There's jobs, and then there's a career. And I think career lends itself to the passion that you have. And it will take every hour that you can give it. If you can give your profession that you love and care so deeply about 8 hours or 10 hours or 12 hours today, it will take that. It's got an insatiable desire to take as much time as you could possibly give it. But why would any of us want to be in anything other than something that we truly love and are passionate about? So I really give this group in particular, the National Sports Media Group, you're doing the right things. People will tell you maybe you should do a lot of different things, but in the end, follow what you want to do. Follow what you're passionate about. That's what led me to the commissioner job. I never planned that when I went to school, but it evolved over time through experiences. So I hope that answers your question, Nicole.
Yeah, it does. And I think that passion is a really good point, because we have seen people leave college sports who don't have that anymore, or who don't want to take on the different challenges and changes that are happening on a day-to-day basis. Now, Ryan, our jobs, so much of them are about relationships. You mentioned writing, communicating. I mean, those are the things that keep you going. I always tell students, if you want to get into sports journalism because you like sports, maybe reconsider that. Keep it as a hobby because you're going to lose some of your fandom. You're going to lose a lot of nights and weekends because it's work. You're going to miss weddings and birthdays. But if you do it because you love relationships with people, building them, deepening them over the period of years, if you love communicating or writing and figuring out ways to convey information to different audiences, that will keep you going. So Ryan, as college sports have changed, has that part stayed the same? Like how have you noticed some of the changes to the landscape and what it means to potentially your job or the things that you want to cover?
Well, there's times I wish I had a business degree, right? I mean, or a legal degree. The good news is I have a brother who's a really good lawyer. So I could call him and go, will you explain this to me? Because I'm not, if I was smart enough to do those things, I probably would have done them, right? But the commissioner makes a great point. And it's what I say all the time, which is, in the spring and in the summer, when it comes to football and basketball, what we're talking about is NIL and transfer portal and are we making the right moves or whatever. And what I always say is, when it comes to football, as long as Saturday still feels like Saturday, we're going to be okay. And the places that I go, it still feels like Saturday. So the question becomes, and the warning I would put out is, when you start altering the DNA of that, that's when you got a problem. I mentioned my career. First half of my career, because I have a Southern accent and worked at ESPN in Connecticut, I covered primarily NASCAR. And I actually worked for NASCAR for a few years, just around the block from where the commissioner's sitting right now. And, Brett Yormark, Commissioner Big 12, will tell you about this too. There were some really bad decisions made by NASCAR in the middle of the first decade of this century, like 2005, 2006. Well, when you're making a lot of money and a lot of people are watching, it's easy to make bad decisions and think you're making great decisions. The bad decisions they made were, you can stretch your roots and you can change the way you water your roots, but you can't pull your roots out of the ground. And as a result, we would sit in these meetings and they would say, yeah, we can do this and do that, but the core fan base is always going to be there. And one day look up and they were gone because they didn't recognize their sport anymore. And that's my warning. And has been, I've written this column multiple times about collegiate athletics, which is, as long as Saturday feels like Saturday, or as long as you go to a basketball game on a Monday night and it feels like it did when you were growing up, the DNA of it, as far as the compensation and the business model and all those things, can change all at once. But as long as the experience when you walk through the turnstile is what you were looking for, because it's what you grew up with and it's your dad's alma mater and it's your alma mater and that's where you want to be, everything's going to be okay. But the concern is when you get too far away from that, when you burn tradition for the sake of, chasing money, killing the goose looking for golden eggs. And there's been moments where we're bumping up against it. And I feel like maybe it's pulling back a little bit because you still want to protect ultimately what we all fell in love with, which is the experience of being in that stadium or being in that arena or being at that swimming meet. It was something, what did it feel like? If it feels like it did when you fell in love with it, then we're going to be okay. But the relationship part is it. I had this conversation with Brent Venables at our Oklahoma on Friday, last week, which is, coach, he's talking about coaching this guy up and coaching that guy up, and he's got a brand new quarterback, and his quarterback was at Auburn who was coming into town to play. And I said, but do the relationships still matter? He goes, they're everything. He said, even if you only have them for a year, and some you have for 6, and some you have for 1, but that relationship is still the same. He said, when that changes, that's when we have a problem. And if it's not there, now the student athlete has a chance to go somewhere else, which I think is great. And so you're looking for that connect. These athletes want to be coached up. They want to be coached up. The ones that don't are doomed anyway. And the ones that succeed, they absolutely want to be coached up. And as long as that's there, and as long as a game at wherever, pick your favorite stadium, feels like it, we're going to be okay.
So Ryan, as you mentioned, there's been times where college sports kind of pushed up against that, where there's been backlash from fans or from people, purists, but even people, like myself, who didn't grow up in it, but this has been their life for more than half of their lives. Is it realignment? Like, what are some of the biggest threats to kind of the future of college sports as we know it?
Give them the games they want. Tomorrow the SEC is going to announce the 3 permanent rivals, when they go to a 9-game schedule. And all right, these are the 3 teams that you're going to play every year because on paper, per our research, these are your rivals. And there's been a lot of debate about that. I'm a University of Tennessee alum. And there was very serious talk a few years ago about should the Tennessee-Alabama game on the third Saturday of October even happen anymore? And all of us of a certain age were like, what are you talking about? But it was based on the fact that Alabama had won the game almost 15 years in a row. Well, now Tennessee's won it, what, 2 out of the last 4. Now you see what it is. But you can't be a prisoner of the moment and make a decision that's going to undo something that's been done for 150 years, right? That's what you worry about. I mean, listen, I was just this last week, I was in Eugene and Corvallis, and there's this resignation of their rivalry is never going to be the same again. 5th most played rivalry in the history of college football. And there's genuine sadness on both sides that they're going to play it next year. They're going to miss it next year for the first time since World War II. And so what's the future going to be? They say they're committed to doing it, but is it going to still feel the same? You have to be careful about taking those things away from people, because that's why they fell in love with you. And if you replace that with a game no one cares about, or 2 games no one cares about, you think that doesn't matter. And in the short term, it might not, but in the long term, I think it does.
Yeah, and we have seen some former rivals at least schedule each other when they've changed conferences to try to keep that. And I always try to point those games out, like the backyard brawl a couple weeks ago.
Yep.
Just that we need it more as much as possible.
I was at Kansas, Missouri. Yeah, I was at Kansas, Missouri, and those people were so. I mean, and you can't keep it away so long that they forget about it, and so you have to do what you can to at least play those games, occasionally.
Commissioner, I wonder how you balance all of that. You're in one of these leagues that now stretches from coast to coast. I know you guys had a meeting today to talk about like future football scheduling. I mean, there's just a lot of like kind of fundamental philosophical questions about how you do this. How do you balance it? And do you want to tell us, did you guys decide anything today?
All right. Ryan is exactly right. And so what you're trying to do is, and I used it before, but you are trying to modernize what you're doing scheduling. The leagues look different. There's more teams in every league than there's ever been as far as at the Power 4 level. So you're trying to hold on to protected rivalries that have been around for a long time that the fans are interested in. And then you're trying to start some new additional rivalries, maybe based on geography or a history that was broken up because something occurred. And in the end, I think what you want to do is listen to the fans. And we've done that, I think, in each of the leagues to the best of our ability. It's not perfect, and they're getting used to some of these new teams and all the rest of it. But I will say that what we've done with the college football playoff has been extraordinary. It just has. I mean, we used to have a system where it was the writers, who I love, who all of you are, they picked the top 2 teams, right, as the national champions and runner-up. And then we started the BCS system, and then we started the CFP system, which now has gone from 2 to 4 to 12. And I think that's the beauty of it. Because yes, the championships 10, 15, 20 years ago were fantastic, but now you have a chance to have more student athletes really chase that CFP trophy, and you have more teams and more schools from different regions of the country. And so you have a responsibility to protect what's good and right and what's really been healthy in college football or college sports in general, but then you also have to be creative to think about things differently. And this last year, I know there's been a lot of talk about what do we do with the CFP moving forward and all the rest of it. But this last year, if you just look at it as a point in time, we had 12 terrific teams. We had, some great games, some more blowout games. But in the end, the interest proven by just viewership and people going to games, et cetera, has never been higher. And I think that's a credit for thinking outside the box some, that it shouldn't just be 2 teams. And in the end, I think listening and really realizing that these are young, in this example, football, these are young men that when they come to a college or a university, they want to play for a national championship. And to try to open that up in a reasonable way, in a fair access way, has really been good. And I know we'll build off of that.
So, Commissioner, as we kind of spin this forward a little bit, you mentioned the playoff and what that has meant for college sports. It's about to enter a new contract. There's been efforts. I know you've spent time on Capitol Hill, lobbying and working with politicians to try to get things done. You mentioned the NCAA governance model has evolved. Is there a path to stability or something close to stability for college sports? Everyone kind of wants to know. And Ryan, you can take it from Kamish after this about like what this thing is going to look like 5 years from now or 10 years from now. I know no one has a crystal ball, but what are some of the things you're tracking as you're trying to help stabilize, modernize the enterprise?
It is a great question, Nicole. It is about stabilization as well. That's what I think we all deserve. I think that's fans deserve. Like just kind of settle in. We've gone through a massive period of expansion. And so that I think that's going to settle in for a while. The TV contracts are always big in the movement of when schools may look and when there may be some jockeying. And expansion isn't new to college sports. It's been around for 75, 80 years and the rest of it. But for the enterprise to stay healthy, there has to be a period of stabilization. And that's what we're looking for. New governance structure. We've got the House case settled. There's payments going to student athletes for the first time. We have the transfer portal, I think, in a better position than when we first started, right? That there's one window instead of two. You got the new governance structure, which allows voting, that has some more autonomy for those, Power Four conferences and the rest. I would just say this: what I'm hopeful for as we go forward, because there's been jockeying for position and all the rest of it, that we continue, and even in a greater level, have a responsibility for the greater good of college sports. Really, I don't think it was good that the Pac-12 collapsed. I just don't. A storied conference over 70 or 75 years. I think that hurt all of us that love the tradition, that we've been talking about, that Ryan described, and that, whether it's Wes and a sidebar or Dave, we've talked about it. I think we got to pay attention to the greater good and make sure we hold on and cherish those traditions. But I'm really hopeful. I'm optimistic that we will have a period of time where there won't be as significant a change. That will be good. That will be good for college sports. Let's pay attention to what we're doing, and not only football, but all these amazing other sports, these amazing male student athletes, female student athletes, and continue to put our hat on that. Yeah, we represent the conference, but we also have a responsibility to make sure that we continue to be really good caretakers of this thing we really cherish called college sports.
Yeah, and I love what the commissioner's saying there, because it's what, again, I grew up on, FCS, what we used to call 1AA and Division II campuses. And we have a lot of Elon students on here today, and y'all know what I'm talking about. And it's when I talk to Kirby Smart, who grew up in the shadow of Valdosta State, or I talked to Jimbo Fisher, who played football at Samford, or I talked to Nick Saban, who played at Kent State and coached at Toledo. What they talk about all the time is, hey, all this is great for us, but is it great for, college football in general and collegiate athletics in general? And so it's all about all the layers. People, and rightfully so, we obsess over Power Four and Notre Dame and all that, and when it comes to football. But there's also all these other conferences, and there's also all these other divisions, and there's all these other sports. And I think people have always lost sight of that. The NCAA is a punching bag and a piñata, whatever you want to call it. But it's also a super, super important governance structure, because their goal isn't just to take care of Notre Dame football. Their goal is to take care of everyone, whatever layer, whatever division they're in, whatever conference they're in, whatever sport they participate in. And I think people forget that. And it's certainly, that's what I grew up as a son of a college administrator. But yeah, Commissioner, you're right. I was just out. You go to the West Coast now, and it's just sad. No matter what conference these schools have landed in, it just doesn't feel the same. And they're wrestling with that. And I'm also really excited to hear you talk about this period of stabilization, because that's what's needed. It's all too much at once. And when it becomes overwhelming, the fan doesn't want to deal with that. Ultimately, for a fan, for an alum, for whoever, this is an escape. Right? This is it. If you work at Bank of America all week, your chance on a Saturday is to escape by going to the Clemson Wake Forest game, or going to a basketball game, or going to something. And if everything around what you enjoy sounds like a business seminar, or you can't keep track of who is where and what they're doing, people will 100% find something else to do because they don't want to be hassled, right? And so a period of stabilization would be the absolute greatest thing at this point, because if we just focus on the games a little bit and we can focus on the here and now as opposed to this obsession with what's going to happen next. And it's right to have that obsession because we haven't ever known what's coming next, and it all changes every 6 months. So for it to sit there for a minute, I think would be sorely needed and, quite frankly, a gift for everyone.
Yeah, I think I want to underscore too, as someone who has covered a lot of the off the field developments, I think it's really important to continue to center what you're talking about, what fans actually care about, what they like, what connects them to the experience. I used to do when I was at the Athletic, I kind of ended up having kind of a beat that was like crazy viral fans. And I would track down people who went viral and do these stories about kind of like how they ended up, you know, down 22-0 to LSU and glaring at the camera, and right, and it became a meme. Found a girl who was crocheting at a Kansas football game when Kansas wasn't any good at football. Like, why is she there? They're down, 34-3. And it was to support a professor who was getting awarded something. She obviously did not care about the football game. So I remember doing those stories and hearing so much from readers that they loved those. And it was just like this fun way to engage with the sport, because we're all watching these games, but those are the things that stick out, right? Like, you're not going to remember, it was Baker Mayfield, Oklahoma team beating Kansas. That's all I really remember about that game. Just that Kansas was miserable at football and this girl was crocheting alone, like during, a quarter break or whatever at this game. And I think that when I started to do those stories, in addition to, covering hard news and realignment and CFP meetings, it did help remind me, and I spent some time on Reddit CFB for this exact same reason. What are all the sickos talking about? What are all the people who watch every level of football? What do they care about? Whenever, I cover college basketball, I always cover all the divisions, all the levels, the low majors, the mid majors. I've covered the games in Dayton to like essentially play into the main draw. I've written about how that's really valuable for those schools because they can win a unit by advancing those games. I've embedded with a 16 seed that was going to play Kentucky, an undefeated Kentucky team. And I think it's really important to cover all levels of all of this and understand why people care. Every team you're going to talk to or write about, or every coach, they have a fan base. They have people who love them and they care about them, and they don't need to be a laughing stock. When Rutgers and Kansas and these places were just like, always finishing dead last in football, I never punched down on them. I would genuinely look for things about turnarounds or exciting wins and write those stories when they pop, because there are fans of everyone. And I think it's really important because I think it's easy to become jaded in this field, in this world, especially as college sports becomes, more professionalized and, there is a lot more coverage of the off the field stuff. But I think it's really important to continue just remembering the core of all of this and why it matters to so many people, and making that such a central piece of this moving forward. And I think for some people, I want to make sure we get to this before we open it up for questions. So Commissioner, I want to start with you, because again, I know we've known each other for many years, and I know that you have always been a champion of the Olympic sports on your campuses, women's sports. You hired some great coaches in all those areas as well over the course of your career. How do we make sure that those are part of the puzzle, of the solution, of the stability moving forward? Because those are really important opportunities for a lot of people. And also, like, as someone who has covered 3 Olympics, that's our Olympic pipeline in a lot of these sports. If they are not funded, if scholarships are taken away, if sports stop being sponsored at a national level, that's really going to affect all of that and potentially take away opportunities for female athletes. So how do you continue to make sure that that is a central piece of college sports moving forward?
And Nicole, you have to be intentional about this. It has to be priority. It has to. Listen, I've been blessed to be the 5th commissioner. Weaver, James, Corrigan, Swafford, they laid the foundation over 70 years for the ACC to be a broad-based programming conference. 28 sports, as I mentioned. It's my responsibility to carry that forward, but not only carry it forward, make sure that we are investing, make sure that we're prioritizing women's sports. It's a life changer. It's a life changer. Having 5 children of my own and 2 student athletes, one of them soccer player at Yale who just graduated. Her life is forever changed because she was a student athlete in college. And I hope that I have another one coming up here soon. And so I look at it from a personal standpoint, and then I just look at it from an opportunity standpoint. I mean, in 1972, the passage of Title IX changed things forever. Now, we still have some work to do, but that's over 50 years ago, and the effects have been incredible. You talk about the Olympics, our conference, and other Power Four conferences and college sports has been fantastic because we are the feeder system. I think the percentage is about 76% of Team USA had an experience in college, whether it was for a year or multiple years or is still in college. Our conference itself, I was proud, had more medals than any conference in the country. And I think Stanford in particular, if they were a country themselves, I think they would have finished 6th or 7th in the medal count, right? So that can't be lost. 99% of kids in college are not going to be professional in a sport. They're just not. It doesn't mean they weren't great college athletes. Doesn't mean that they're not terrific student athletes. It means that this is, and I'll finish with this, it's what I try to state at every turn. Why do I love college sports? Why do so many people love college sports? Because without it, you would not have access and affordability to a segment of population in our country and even from other countries that would have a chance to go to college. There's a lot of kids that don't come from backgrounds that their parents have the financial resources for them to go to college. So they can come because they get a scholarship, and they can access it because they also play a great sport. And in the history of this great country, only the GI Bill has ever provided more scholarships, grant aids for a group of young people than college sports. That's worth fighting for. And at the heart of it is broad-based programming for young women and young men beyond just the sport of football or beyond just the sport of basketball. And that we need to continue to make sure that we're supporting and that it's thriving and we are investing in those young people.
Ryan, you and I were talking a little bit earlier today. I know you just spent time with Oklahoma softball program, which is a dynasty in its own right. But this is very top of mind. I mean, I covered, I was around swimming programs all summer. It was the number 1 thing everyone's talking about, the House settlement, rev share, the budgets that they were going to have, if they were going to have different scholarship limits. What's your take on how to continue to evolve and support Olympic sports, women's sports at a really high level?
Well, it just has to be a priority. I mean, the commissioner is exactly right. And it's, I go back to, my dad was president of a Division II school in North Carolina for 20 plus years, Wingate University. And what dad always said was he couldn't have enough student athletes on campus. So they wanted all the sports they could have because they were his best students. They were the ones that he could count on. They're the one that all they know is hard work, right? All they know how to do. I mean, it's a full-time job as a college student. It's also a full-time job as a college athlete. And so when you have more athletes on campus, you have a lot smarter people and a lot of hardworking people and people who want to get to the next level of whatever it is they're going to do with their life. And, I was talking to Coach Gasso about this. We were talking about Pat Summitt, who was the head basketball coach at Tennessee when I was a student there, was so good to me when I worked in the athletic department. Coach Summitt had 8 national championships. Coach Gasso has 8 national championships. And we were talking about, man, there's so many reasons I wish Coach Summitt was still here. But the biggest is so she could see where all this has come, where she came from and where it's all going now. What I've always kind of chuckled at is this non-revenue sport title, because you kind of hang that albatross around their neck like, oh man, football's got to drag them around, right? Basketball's got to drag them around. But the growth for those sports, the growth potential for those sports is immeasurable. I cover college baseball. I go to Omaha every single year. Growing up in the Triangle in the 1980s, my dad and my brother and I would go to baseball games at North Carolina State and at Wake and in Chapel Hill and Duke. They're all putting players into the big leagues, and there'd be 30 people there. It'd be the 2 of us and the girlfriends and a couple of scouts and maybe some parents. That was it. Now you go back to NC State and you go back to the Bosch, Carolina. Duke's been going to the College World Series a couple of times. They're machines. I mean, Wake Forest should have a College World Series title, and the places are packed. Volleyball, right? I mean, what we're seeing in Nebraska with volleyball is one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. And women's basketball, I mean, I always said gymnastics was made for, that is a made for television sport, just like softball. And as a result, they're packing it in and the TV ratings are through the roof. So I always kind of chuckle at the excuse of, well, that sport only can grow so far. Not true, especially from the world I grew up in. So I think that it's important to protect it. I like for America to win gold medals, right? We all do. And so there's so many reasons to protect that. And what you want is the promise from people like Commissioner Phillips, but also the athletic directors and the chancellors and the board of trustees, the people who ultimately decide where their money on their campus is going to go. You have to protect those sports. And the good news is, at least at the highest levels, it feels like that's going to happen.
Yeah, I will echo. Oh, sorry, Commissioner, do you have something?
I say, I mean, Ryan's exactly right. And you know it. I mean, women's basketball and the uptick that Caitlin Clark provided when she was at Iowa is immeasurable, right? That lifted the whole game. One player, right? And we're seeing it. I was on a CNBC business panel on sport in Santa Monica I think Tuesday. The days are running into each other, and they asked me what's the next women's sport out there, and Ryan said, like volleyball. You see the masses that are going to volleyball, and the benefit volleyball has over maybe softball, which is also a really very highly attended and watched game, is that the volleyball arenas now are basketball arenas, right? And basketball arena volleyball. So now you can get 17, 18, 19,000 people. I see it at Louisville in our conference, right? Pitt's excellent. Louisville's excellent. Georgia Tech, Stanford. And so that's been an intentional investment by these athletic departments on behalf of women's sports, because they see what you can do and what happens if you pay attention to it, be intentional, invest in it, and hire some great coaches and support them. So I'm excited about where women's sports is going. I really am.
And Nicole, I say this all the time too. A ticket is a vote, and people that want to support these sports, go support these sports. Because if you show up and you fill these arenas that the commissioner's talking about, or in Nebraska's case, a football stadium, and you sell out women's tournaments and you sell all, then you give them no excuse to get rid of it. So if you are a supporter of it, do everything you can to support it. And it's not just, donating to whoever, that's going to the event and that's supporting the event, because you cannot turn the lights off in a packed house. You can't do it. And so if people show up and support these things, it becomes impossible for someone to sit in a room and go, we got to get rid of that because nobody cares, because visibly they do.
By the way, I appreciate that. I just got a statement from the ACC Commissioner, Jim Phillips, in my inbox while we've been on this panel about the ACC
good job. Good job, Commissioner.
9 conference games, minimum of 10 against Power 4 opponents, which I fully support, because again, these are good football games. More crossover in some of these larger leagues. So sorry, we had some breaking news on our panel. But I know Wes has been waiting for this all day.
I love it. That's why we did this, Ken Gaither. Just remember, Elon School of Communications, we're breaking news right here.
First to hear it. But I think that what you guys are talking about are all great points. And these are now avenues of beats and coverage areas for young journalists to go into, because I remember coming out, I graduated in 2011. I don't know that I knew anyone who is a dedicated women's sports reporter or just women's basketball. Now those jobs exist. And there have been people who are able to kind of like attach themselves to the rocket ship as the sport has grown. I've covered the Women's College World Series and covered games that continue to set attendance records and viewership records. And it's awesome, because again, it's sort of like, if you build it, they will come. If you cover it, interest will go up. And so there's a lot of opportunities to cover more areas of college sports than ever before. But I want to, before we get to, I have a good question from the audience, but I want to ask you guys both this. We're talking to, there's a lot of students in this watching us right now. Are there undercovered areas of college sports? Are there things that if you could go back in time, you wish you had spent a little bit more time in? Like, are there ideas of what these students listening right now might want to dip their toe into to be better positioned for whatever may come, we all said there's twists and turns in a career you never necessarily predict. But Ryan, why don't you start? Is there a sport, or like you said, multimedia? Is there advice you would give to someone who, is looking at potential opportunities?
Well, the first piece of advice you said off the top, which is, back in the day, you had to pick a lane, right? I want to be a play-by-play person. I want to be a columnist. I want to be whatever. Now you have to be able to do a little of all of it because, listen, Nicole and I are living proof. You're looking at a couple of writers, and in my case, at one point I was just a production assistant cutting highlights for SportsCenter, who are now on television every week, and on radio Nicole's on radio every day. So it's you need to be able to communication students, and you need to be able to do it over whatever medium because it's going to change. I mean, social media didn't exist, and I have no idea what's going to be next, but whatever it is, I'm going to roll with it. I'm so old. I remember when all the newspaper writers were angry about the internet because they didn't want to write for the internet, is what they said. So then they're all gone. So you have to be able to evolve and roll with that. But I would say on a college campus, you are given so many opportunities. And I think about when I worked in the athletic department at Tennessee, the highlight was the football team and the women's basketball
Oh
team.
no, did we lose Ryan again? Oh, you're back. Okay.
Well, I was going to say, when I was at Tennessee as a student in communications, the highlight was football and women's basketball. But the reality is where I learned the job was covering softball and covering baseball and covering volleyball and covering swim meets, covering the golf team. Marty Smith, who I do my Marty McGee show with, he covered Radford's women's basketball as a student. That's what he did on the road with the women all the time, writing about it. That's that you get your reps in. It's just like being an athlete, reps. The more you do it, the better you will be at your craft. And so, yeah, find a sport that you think is undercovered and underutilized, and make that your beat. And no matter what you end up doing down the road, that will definitely serve you well.
Ryan, one of the questions we got was directed at me and you, and it was, does the fact that college athletes now get paid change the way you cover college sports or cover athletics?
It changes, and I don't want to speak for you, but it changes for me a little bit availability. Those who, and this is really only applies to the top probably 1% of the student athletes who are really making a lot of money. They have agents now, and the SI sports information directors will help you as much as they can. But there's been a couple of times, and this had never happened before until, and I think it was more of a problem at the dawn of NIL than it is now. But you tell me about your experience. But been a couple times where it's like, I can't help you. You gotta reach out to them, or am I going to get paid for this? That's only happened a couple times to me, but it never happened before.
I think there's some things that have I think made a lot of sense that have changed in this world, coupled with prevalence of like legalized sports gambling, and different things. We've seen availability reports. I think there needs to be a lot more kind of standardized pieces like that as the sport professionalizes a little bit, and it becomes a little bit bigger business. I've seen people who've said I'm more okay criticizing a college player, knowing that they're paid, and closer to professional. But I always think back, even with this, it is not a professional. I remember I covered Little League softball, baseball, 12 and under. They would feed into the Little League World Series. If a ball went through someone's leg to lose the game, you're absolutely not writing that. The story there is the person who had the hit, the game-winning hit. If that happens in a high school game, maybe you mention that there was an error, at the position, but you don't name the kid. College, it's, you're just like upping the accountability level, and the responsibility. And so in college, you're going to identify the kid, you're going to let them answer it and whatever it is. But, if that happens to pros and that's how a World Series is lost, it's known forever, right? Like that person is a laughing stock and is something that, was everyone felt free to criticize. So again, it's just like there's different levels of things. I think with, how much this is someone's job or how much they are paid. I do think it changes a little bit, but these are still college kids. They're still figuring life out, 18 to 22. A lot changes. You're going through a lot. People might have a bad game because their girlfriend broke up with them, right? Like, it's a different world than a pro athlete who we all know is making, $20 million a year. We have one quick question that I'll toss to Ryan real quick, and then I'm going to get closing thoughts. What do you make of foreign professional players being allowed to play in the NCAA?
Yeah, it's an interesting spot, and but I think that we're redefining amateurism. And so, back in the day, I mean, famously Jim Thorpe, lost his gold medals because he, played a little bit of minor league baseball somewhere in Eastern North Carolina, for a few bucks. And so I think the way that we penalize people, the way that we judge people, the whatever we're holding them to is not the same as it was. We don't want any NFL players coming back playing college football, but I think that's apples and oranges. It's if you have a little bit of experience at what we might equate in America to a semi-pro level or to a minor league level, then it's okay. Russell Wilson played minor league baseball when he was playing quarterback in NC State, right? I mean, so this is there's it doesn't bother me at all. And to me too, I think it's an underreported aspect of collegiate athletics is what we're talking about. I mean, one of my favorite stories I've ever worked on was Ziggy Ansah, who played at Georgia Tech. Wes knows him, and the story of or played at BYU. He played against Georgia Tech. That's a whole other story, right, Wes? And but it was but Ziggy Ansah is a kid that had never played football before, came to the United States, went to BYU, and all pro at the NFL, and now goes back home and takes the money that he's made to change where he's coming from. So I think that athletes that have played pro ball at a lower level, I got no issue with.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I think a lot of this has shifted as the model has shifted. And things that would have been like, across the red line are no longer. Before we go, because I want to be respectful of everyone's time, we'll start with you, Commissioner. Just any last thoughts about kind of where this is all going, or what people what interests you? What are some of the unknowns, the questions that you want to see answered in college sports in the coming years?
I think one of the biggest one is the finance. Are the finances sustainable? We've never generated more revenue in college sports, but our expenses have never been greater than they are. Can we keep our group together? Can we keep the association together? And not everyone has all the resources. There's lots of conferences that have fewer resources, and so this idea of the good of college sports, I hope we'll all continue to protect it. And then I would just say for this particular group, I know I really appreciate the work that you do. I've always tried to have a really good relationship with the media. I respect greatly what you do. We can't tell our stories without you, and we benefit from having a 24/7 network on the ACC network with Wes does such a good job, and Ryan's obviously on the SEC network and ESPN, and you really matter to us. So I hope we can continue to provide access for the things that you need. You're lucky that you found a profession that you really love and are passionate about it, because nobody ever does what they're doing for the money. They just don't. As you go on, maybe all of a sudden things just kind of fall into place, but keep doing what you're doing, stay committed. And then finally, the one last thing is, don't forget, you need to pay it forward to the next generation that's behind you. Like, there's 1,000 people that helped me in my life and advocated for me. You have that responsibility. It doesn't matter where you're at in your career. There is somebody behind you that wants to be like you and wants to work in an area like you. Don't ever forget the influence you can have, and don't ever underestimate what you can do for somebody else that really loves the same profession. So, just that's Nicole.
I love that, and thank you again for all the time you've spent. Ryan, you got a last piece of advice you wanted to get off your chest before we go?
Well, I'll tack on to what the commissioner said, which is, I'm Irish, right? So I remember everyone who was really good to me when I started out, and I also remember everyone who wasn't. And you can protect your position to a point, but ultimately, if you really genuinely love what you do, and this applies to being a coach or a college administrator or as a sports writer, if you really love it, then you need to do what you can to ensure that it is in as good a shape as you can leave it, and that the next people coming along behind you that are caretaking it will take care of it the way you did. And so the commissioner is 100% right. It's okay to be nice. You can be competitive and still be nice. Nicole and I are great friends, and we've never worked for the same place. So you can make it work.
I love all of those messages. I am not right next to a supply closet. I would like the record to reflect I'm at an airport. I am flying to Eugene. I don't know why this panel is so Eugene focused, but I am doing this from the airport at Chicago, in the O'Hare Airport. My last piece of message, and again, thank you to everyone who tuned in and spent this last hour with us, is it's all about relationships. Do the job because you care about people, and because you want to, because you're curious about them, and you want to get to know them, and that will keep you going regardless of when it's hard or it's changing and there's breaking news at 11 p.m. or you're covering the arrest of a player and it's something that you couldn't have imagined that you were doing when you decided you wanted to raise your hand and get into sports. But relationships matter. Treat people well, and protect your reputation. That's all you got. So just remember that and work hard. But I'll turn it back over to Wes or Dave or whoever.
Thanks,
Anyone,
Nicole.
you guys want to wrap it up?
Appreciate it very much. Safe travels to Eugene. Thank you so much for doing this. Thanks to Ryan. Thanks to the commissioner as well for the time today. Really appreciate it, Jim, on a day where you got a lot going on. So we're grateful for the time here today. I will offer this, Dave, here real quick. We will, as we said at the top, for those of you that joined us late, we will send out the November convergence. We will send that probably in mid to late October, give you a couple weeks to register. I can tell you that we are going to incorporate more NSMA board members and guests and things like that along the way. Then we'll have two more. Hopefully, we're going to work it out for February and April. I know spring breaks on campus are in April. Some are also in March at other campuses. So we're trying to figure out how we want to do the spring and not getting everybody's spring break plans. So, but we're going to try and do February. Hopefully, keep your fingers crossed somewhere around the Super Bowl, and then we'll do something else in April. Who knows? Maybe we can incorporate a couple different things there along the way. Dave, anything to add here?
No, you covered it all. I appreciate it. Let me add thank you to Nicole. Safe flight to Eugene. I'll be there in 3 weeks with the Deacons because we're staying there when they play at Oregon State. So we can all compare dinner recommendations in the big Emerald City of Eugene. Jim Phillips, thank you very much for your time and insight. Ryan McGee, thank you. Tell ESPN they need to get you a stronger signal in your library, please.
I'm not even responding to that, Dave. I'm here.
Thank you all, and we'll be in touch with everyone. This will be available probably tomorrow at some point, and we'll let everybody know. And with that, thank you all very much.